Good evening. Today is Wednesday, March 27th, 2024, and I would like to call to order this regularly scheduled meeting, hybrid meeting of the Board of Commissioners of the Chittenden Solid Waste District. First item on the agenda is the agenda itself. I have one change to make, and then I'll ask other commissioners if they have any requests to add or change anything. We have a request to move other business to before the executive session. This is as a courtesy to our television folks who, so that they can wrap up their evening a little bit early. So if there is other business, just be on notice that we'll be doing that before we go into executive session. Beyond that change, are there any requests for additions or changes to the agenda? I am hearing none. I don't have a full screen of all the commissioners, so I can't see you. Maybe we can change the views mode so we can see everybody. But if anybody has a request, rather than raising a hand, just please speak up. All right, I'm hearing none. So the agenda will be followed with the one exception again of other business. Item number 8 will be taken up before we go into executive session. Next item on the agenda is the public comment period. Are there any members of the public present via phone or Zoom? There are none here in the CSWD conference room. If there are any members of the public, this is your opportunity to address the board. I am hearing none, so we will close the public comment period and move on to item number 3, which is the consent agenda consisting of the minutes of the January 24th, 2024 public hearing and the February 28th, 2024 Board of Commissioners meeting. Also program updates, memos, finance report, and the second quarter financial report. Any requests to pull any of those items from the consent agenda? I am hearing none, therefore the consent agenda will be accepted as presented in the board packet. And again, right now we're only seeing, we're not seeing the full panelist view on our screen here. So if you
John, can you change the view to gallery?
Oh,
Up on top there. Nope, you just over to the left.
to the
Right. See where it says view up top? Yeah.
okay, now we're good, and I can see everybody if you happen to be raising your hand. Again, the consent agenda has been accepted. We'll move on to item number 4, which is the solid waste management ordinance, which appears on page 27 of the board packet. And at this point, I will turn it over to Sarah to lead us through this part of the meeting.
Great. I'll kick it off, but then I'll also turn over to Josh Esty to answer any questions or to expand on what we're going to have a conversation about. So as we've been discussing with the board and with the finance committee since really since November when we presented the proposed budget, we are intending in this budget to increase the solid waste management fee from $27 per ton to $30 per ton. And the budget that we'll be discussing later in the meeting does contain $30 a ton as solid waste management fee. But in order to make that change, we do need to change the ordinance, to amend the ordinance to reflect that. And the reason is because we happen to have in our ordinance where we specifically state the dollar amount of the solid waste management fee. So anytime we need to change that fee, we do have to go through the change process. So currently, the current language in the ordinance, section 8.2, amount of fee, the solid waste management fee is $27 per ton. So the recommendation is that the board adopt a change to the solid waste management fee to say, replacing the current language that I read with the solid waste management fee is $30 per ton. And the change, we're requesting that the change not take effect until July 1. So it would be a little bit longer than is spelled out in the law. The law requires, I think it's a 60-day waiting period, but that would be a little bit longer than that if the board adopts this fee tonight. And so we are recommending that because this is essentially an administrative change, a change to the fee, it is not a change to anything regulatory. It's not a change to any licensing processing or anything that would require or where we would want to do some outreach to get some input. It really is, again, akin to changing a tipping fee in the budget. We are suggesting that because we have already discussed this potential fee change in several meetings, I've not got them listed here, November 15th, February 14th, February 15th, February 28th, that we simply move ahead with the adoption tonight of the change in the ordinance. And it is different than how we approach changes in the ordinance that are, again, regulatory in nature or are policy changes, because this is administrative and we have already discussed this and received some verbal comments from Casella back in November. We feel confident that the public has had a good number of opportunities to talk to the board, to be at a meeting and to discuss the change. Statutorily, it is within the board's ability to adopt the change. And then at this meeting, it is a publicly warned meeting. And from there, if the board were to adopt the change tonight, then we would go on to all the public notification requirements as spelled out in the statute. Josh, have I left things out or do you want to add?
No, I think that pretty well covers it.
Okay. So I'll open it for questions.
We can open up for questions. At this point, there is a motion at the bottom of this section of the board packet. Once that's read into the record, we'll also have a chance for questions and comments. Paul Stabley, your hand is up.
Yeah, just a quick question. We had discussed possibility and or at least in the budget meeting, of changing the way we do this. I said I think it becomes part of the budget process. Have we decided not to pursue that any further, or do you have any comments on that, Sarah?
Yeah, Josh and I talked about that, and I think that takes more conversation. I would rather have a longer discussion about that in particular. We do still feel that it would be appropriate to move changing the fee into the budget process for all the reasons that we've discussed in the past couple of meetings where, again, there are far more opportunities for the public to comment on budget changes than there would be in an ordinance change. However, because this is the only item being changed, we felt it was, appropriate to just address it this one time as this one kind of a one-off item. And it's very straightforward. There's nothing ambiguous about it. It's not a policy item that needs debate or discussion. Certainly discussion, but not necessarily debatable. And we thought that there are other changes to the ordinance that we would like to see made over the next 6 months or so. So having a larger discussion about what those may look like, and then doing larger changes within the next 6 months, we felt would be a more appropriate use. In addition, because we are including the fee in the budget, we did want to kind of line up everything so that I could get out into the community should the board authorize the budget to be distributed to our member towns, and could then say that the board changed the ordinance. So what is reflected in the budget is reflected through the board's decisions, where if we went to public comment period, that would change the process a little bit. I would not be able to go to the member towns with a budget that was kind of a pending dollar item, particularly with something that's so large. And so it just threw that process a little bit up in the air. Should the board decide that they're not comfortable with approving adopting the language tonight, we can certainly accommodate a lengthened timeline on the budget transmittal to our member towns. But it seemed like kind of the stars were aligning to just take care of this one thing. And statutorily, it's certainly allowed to do this, use this process.
Okay, thank you. It sounds like we'll consider it further in the future, so that's fine. Okay. I mean, I'm very comfortable with this proposed motion.
Ben, your hand is up.
Hi, I just want to start by saying I'm also very comfortable with the proposed motion. But my question is, and I think if it's okay to comment on this, maybe you haven't prepared this kind of a comment, but I think the board might want to hear this. I was thinking about, I don't know really what the impact is on the budget of this $3 increase is, but when I've spent time looking at the budget and see all the major things that are happening, from the increased cost of the MRF to the increased cost of the closed landfill to the potential for PFAS regulations and all these sort of like, whoa type things. Was there any consideration of increasing it more than $3? And would you like to flesh that out in any way so that you didn't get caught short?
That is a great question, Ken. And we internally, the budget team and I briefly talked about it, but then went back down to 30. And we felt that the increase from 27 to 30 was manageable for our haulers, easily explained as far as, why that jump. Even though it has been quite a long time since we've raised it, and higher would not necessarily have been out of the realm of possibility. The increase represents approximately $400,000. Nola can verify that math, but it's about that increase. So if we were to go up to, 32, 33, say you could ish double that. So that, if we went up to 33, would wipe out the potential for needing to draw down that little bit that we'll need to draw down in the budget for out of the reserves. However, that would be a sizable jump. The last time we increased the solid waste management fee, we increased it by $5. So it wouldn't be out of the realm of discussion to do another $5 increase after such a long time. We wouldn't, say no to that. Again, it would certainly balance the budget for fiscal 25, but we felt from, a stakeholder perspective that a $3 fee would be more than acceptable.
And does Leslie have anything to say? I kind of feel like she'd be a good person to say, like, yeah, this is not you're not doing enough or something. I don't know if she's here or not.
Yeah, no, Leslie's not on the line today. I think you're right. My hunch is she would likely agree that last time was $5. To say this time is $5 would not be too large of a leap. It would still not have us be the highest solid waste management fee out of the districts. We would, I think, at that point be second in the fee, second or third. So I think I agree. I think she would likely support that, but I put that.
Okay, well, I'm just gonna say, I just threw it out to give it to you if you wanted to bring it up. I completely trust what you all have decided together. And I'll leave it at that.
So at this point, I just want to point out, we have not yet had a motion. We're just kind of in the informational discussion stage. Once we have a motion, it could be amended to change the dollar figure or potentially the process for approval of this. But again, I just wanted to be clear where we're at in this discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Are there other preliminary questions, observations on this matter? Marty, your hand is up.
Yeah, I'm completely comfortable with this, and although it does sound like more money would be a good thing, it also is I mean, my memory is what's been discussed at previous meetings has been a $3 increase. In other words, to the extent that we're relying on the fact that this has been discussed before, I guess I feel somewhat constrained by the previous discussions of $3, but I leave that for others to comment on.
I think we're ready for the motion. If somebody would care to make the motion.
Want me to read that into?
Oh, yes, please.
Be it resolved that the CSWD Board of Commissioners hereby approves a change to the district's solid waste management ordinance, section 8.2 amount of fee, replacing the current language with the solid waste management fee is $30 per ton. This change shall take effect July 1, 2024.
So move Westford.
I'll second.
Second has been, thank you, Henry. It's been moved and seconded to adopt the resolution to increase the solid waste management fee to $30 per ton effective July 1st, 2024. Is there any discussion on the motion? I'm just going to call out for the record that NOLA has posted a comment saying that were this fee to be increased by $5, oh, the comment went away.
Another $2, it would be to, by $5 would be another $250,000. On top of the already.
Right. But personally, I would kind of echo what Margie has said. We have, the public has been aware, those who have paid attention, that we've been talking about $3, and I would say we're duty bound, honor bound, to act on that figure rather than a different one. We're not hearing Sarah say that we need a higher number to make this budget work. My sense is you're very conservative.
I wouldn't say no. But we'll have the conversation later on what we.
Right. But I think your credentials as running a tight ship and not asking for more money than you think is necessary in order to make our numbers work and balance our budget. I think that comes through loud and clear. I would also point out, once were this to be approved, I believe then the new solid waste management fee would be $30 per ton, no matter what we do with the budget in the next step.
Correct, as of July 1.
As of July 1.
That's right.
Just again, for everybody to understand. And then one final comment, as Paul was asking, there had been discussion further about changing the methodology of future changes to the solid waste management fee. That is not on the table. That is not in this motion. That is for another day. So by voting on this motion, it's simply to change the solid waste management fee to $30.
Okay.
Further questions or discussion on the motion? I am hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. Any abstentions? Kelton, you're voting no. Kelton, correct? We'll have that recorded.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe, are there any abstentions? I will declare that the motion carries and the increase has been approved. Thank you all very much.
Thanks.
We're now ready to move on to item number 5, which is the FY25 budget adoption. And again, I'll turn it over to Sarah to initiate the discussion. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I get this? I'm sorry. I'm out of order here.
No, nope, you are correct. I just have it in a different packet. So yes, we will move on to the proposed budget. John, are you able or is someone able to bring up the PowerPoint? Did Amy send that to you?
Is it in the folder?
I emailed it to you.
It's not.
Sorry. 25 minutes ago?
I'll put it in the folder.
So while we're bringing that up, I can certainly chat extemporaneously. So this year's budget is is one that is very, very tight. Again, it feels like I've been bringing you tight budgets for a couple of years now. There's good news and some areas where we want to focus. So the good news is that again, we're not calling for any municipal assessments and no per capita fees. So that is something that we haven't done in many, many years, and generally would only utilize municipal assessment for kind of paying down debts that we are not able to pay through user fees. Many of the other districts, solid waste districts and alliances do utilize per capita fees as part of their budgets. We do not. So we are, again, not calling for a need for any municipal assessments, which is a good thing. So I just want to lead off with good news for sure. And then we're going to share that.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. So I'll have to ask you to. Oh, and I forgot to put in our mission. So you can skip right over to number 3 there, John. Yeah. So there we go. So this is basically how we're presenting our budgets, and folks who are familiar with looking at our financials every month, and so on the finance committee and the exec board, we look at the budgets through income statement and our balance sheet. So we're looking at revenue as it's coming in, calling it income, and then the expenses. And then also we look at the assets, liabilities, net position, reserves as well. So there are essentially 2 components to any budget. Next, please. So here's the overview. We're looking at after the cost of sales, I should actually say cost of goods. We're looking at a gross profit, so income revenue at just under $15.8 million, and total expenses at just over $16 million. So we're seeing that we will have a shortfall this year for the first time in a long time, if everything goes according to this exact budget. And at the very end, I'll tell you why I think it's likely to be different. But for transparency and for budgeting purposes, this is what we're looking at initially, at having a slight shortfall. Okay. But this is what the income looks like. So this is kind of our buckets, right? So when we talk about where do we receive our income, where does our money come from? This does tend to change and shift. So where you'll see the difference, I think, from past budgets for folks who've been on the board for a little bit, is in that dark blue sale of materials. That number is the big wedge, the big piece of the pie that is the most volatile. That is the one that we don't control, that really at all, as far as how much we're going to be receiving from the MRF for our commodities. It goes up and down on a monthly basis. We have control over the price that we sell our compost at, and then we sell our paint at. But the bulk of that sale of materials is from the MRF. And so, we had a boom year a couple of years ago that was out of the blue. So in that year, the percentage of income for sale of materials was probably double that figure. It was in the mid to high 20s. But a normal year, I think if we're looking at a kind of a normal year, where do we want to see that? I'd love to see that closer to between 20, 24%, 25% of our income being that sale of materials. Solid waste management fee, similarly, about 25%, with tipping fees or user fees making up the bulk of our revenue. And that's where we'd like to get to. So because that sale of materials, really the MRF materials, is so much out of our control, that's the tricky bit. But again, I'll talk a little bit more later on how I think we're going to try to manage some of that. What you're not seeing here in the income are the little teeny tiny things that didn't round up to 1%. We have a couple of things in there that are small numbers. So the total doesn't necessarily add up to 100, but the money does. Next, please, John. Thank you. Similarly with expenses, doesn't quite add up to 100 on the percentages, but the smaller ones kind of fall off. I wanted to show this too, so that you can see kind of what the bulk of the expenses are. And when we say materials management, that is the fees, those are the fees that we pay to Casella, to Myers, to Wickham, to move, literally move our materials either to market or to disposal. So those are essentially our hauling fees. And fees that we pay, tip fees we may pay at other facilities. That remains the bulk of our fees, that our expenses. Payroll expenses are climbing. And that is the second largest, well, I guess though it was the second largest component of our expenses. They are climbing as they are climbing everywhere. And I don't necessarily think that's awful to have the payroll be such a large chunk of the overall expenses. When you compare the percentages to other municipalities in the country or even in the region, it is not at all unusual for wages, benefits, payroll expenses to be fully, if not more than half of the expenses of a municipality. We are always striving to keep our payroll expenses down as much as we can. We recently, in the past year or so, moved to a lower cost to the district benefit plan. A few years prior to that, we had increased the employee contribution to employee salary contribution to the cost of their plan. We didn't want to keep increasing that cost to employees because it is just a negation of any gains they would see on their wages. So, and we're still unusual in that we are requiring employees to contribute towards the cost of the benefits. So there's still potentially some room to move, but the healthcare is extraordinarily expensive. Now, the payroll expenses did jump this past year because we, and I thank the board for this, we did have a large cost of living adjustment last year based on inflation over the past couple of years, and that is being moderated back down, as you'll see in this budget. And the payroll expenses, again, in the budget, we generally come in when we look at our actuals for a fiscal year under our budgeted amount. And that can be for a number of reasons, not full utilization of the healthcare benefits. Maybe we didn't make a couple of hires. There's a few reasons why that might come in. Someone might change their plan from family to person to one person. So there are a number of reasons why the payroll expenses do tend to come in under budget, but we have to budget as if everyone was going to be on a family plan, as if we were going to fully hire all that we intend to hire. So while the payroll expenses in the budget are almost up to 40%, likely will come in below that. But it is an increasing number, and we are not alone. Next, please. So this is just again, a comparison from last year to this year. And the numbers, everything is up, revenue slightly, cost of goods is down actually quite a bit. Gross profit is up slightly and expenses are up quite a bit. And this is again, the wages and benefits. It's budgeted over 6 million. We likely will come in just shy of that. But when you're looking at the total compensation package that is offered to employees, it's about a 5% increase. And that is again, wages, salaries, and benefits over fiscal 24. And again, point of comparison, the fiscal 24 cost of living adjustment was 7%, and this year we're proposing 2.81. And again, just comparison on the operating budgets. John, I don't know if you can minimize that.
If it goes to,
Oh yeah, right, there we go. Yep. Nope. Yep. Yeah. All right. Thank you. So the operating, we're dividing it between operating departments and administrative departments. So this is just the overview for operations alone. Next, please. A couple of years ago, we added operations administration to capture basically the folks who are not dedicated to only one department. So they're not just working on docks, they're just not working on ORF, et cetera. And essentially that is our director of operations, who we're intending to rehire this year in fiscal 25, our Assistant Director of Operations, Brian, and our Construction Project Manager, Kaylee. So materials recycling facility. So we're continuing to anticipate, very solid income and, reasonable expenses. The almost entirety of that expense is the contract, the operating contract with Casella. And as the board may recall from last year, the operating fee, the processing fee went up quite a bit last year when the renegotiation of that contract. And we are now in that renewed contract where the increases will be according to CPI increase. So the same thing that we use to calculate our COLA is the same increase that we are applying to increases with the processing fee at the MRF. So that kicks in mid-year. That increase will go into effect next January as well. But it does go up according to whatever the last 12-month average will be in December. We are budgeting we are increasing the tip fee by $5 to $90 a ton. We're now really at the cusp of the market range. And when we say the market range for the tip fee, we're talking in the Northeast region. So Vermont, Maine, New Hampshire, upstate New York. And the market range can fluctuate because private sector can change their tip fee month to month to manage expectations with the commodity sales. So we don't do that. We plug in a number, excuse me, and we hold that. Generally, we hold that. We want to hold that for the entire fiscal year. The market range past year has been anywhere between 85 a ton and 125 a ton, occasionally a little bit higher. I don't believe lower than 85. So if the market range is in that 85 to 120, we're comfortable that we are there and still on the low end. We are budgeting revenue from the commodity sales a bit conservatively, and we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. Next, please. I'll go back up to hazardous waste. Thank you. So then this is the environmental depot. And again, the increase to disposal costs is the materials management section of the budget. We are receiving an increase to it's called the SWIP grant. So that's our solid waste implementation plan grant from the state. It hasn't gone up in many years. It is going up quite modestly by $5,000. But the remainder of this budget is subsidized through the operating reserve. And this is done so that we can accept household hazardous waste from our residents at no fee, no charge. And the organics recycling facility. So we're not budgeting a tip fee this year at
the increase.
No tip fee increase we are not budgeting a tip fee increase. We are also not budgeting an increase in inbound tons per se, but we are working on that. That's another factor that is a little bit volatile. We are seeing cost of goods increasing, and again, that is the items that go into creating compost, creating garden mix, creating topsoil. So those components, that part of the recipe, those prices keep going up. Dan is actually looking into some pretty inventive ways to bring that cost down. So that number may be different, which is exciting. Also looking at a pilot program, working with some local companies. We're not ready to talk about that quite yet, but it's looking promising. We are looking at reducing the cost to processing wood. So that has some really great long-term potential benefits down the road. Potentially at some point could be a revenue stream. Right now it is not. It is simply an expense reducer. But that will kick in this year. We're hopeful also that we'll be able to receive a grant for some of that equipment, which would help offset those costs. And again, this is also a little bit volatile as far as we don't control necessarily whether people are going to buy from us. We always sell through material, which is wonderful, but we don't control whether they will or not. We did increase this year the costs, our pricing on our material, And the increases were borne by the market, which was good news. Next, please. And drop-off centers. So no increases to bag fees at our drop-off centers. As I mentioned in my memo, mid-year this year, we did marry up match the increases that we had made. So we increased the bag fees in July. We did not at that time increase the larger bulk pricing for things like C&D, and we did that just recently. So there are no additional increases to bag fees, to C&D at all at the drop-off centers. We are aiming to reopen Burlington, the location on Pine Street at the end, fingers crossed, and Brian and I talked about this today, fingers crossed at the end of June of this current fiscal year. So kicking off the next fiscal year, bringing trash services back to the Pine Street location. We are reconfiguring that site for better flow, for greater safety, which was really a key factor in the inefficiency of the site. And we are limiting materials there. So it's calling it Fast Trash Plus, which is the basics. So taking trash, recycling, food scraps, and scrap metal. And we're not utilizing the scale. We will be just accepting bags. So all of our sites will be bags, and we will not be having access to the scale in Burlington. Additional costs for the drop-off centers are, again, we've got to take a look at our stormwater infrastructure, but we're showing a small net to the positive. So that will go into the operating reserve. Property management, this has always been a break even, and because we are getting out of the rental business, we are showing a loss here. Just the one remaining property, that middle property in the building on Flint Avenue. Biosolids is basically essentially a little bit more than a pass through for us. We do receive some a small management fee for acting as the fiscal agent. There's only a few of our member towns that are part of that contract. We just extended that contract for 5 years. That was in effect this past March, I believe. No, January this year. So that is going on for the next 4.5 years. And that is only for those handful of communities that have wastewater treatment facilities that have opted into that contract. So really, once we finish with negotiating the contract, it's a billing function, and there's not much more to be done there. We do have a biosolids reserve. So the monies that we invest in that are in that fund, we did invest some of that money, and the interest that was garnered from the investment of the biosolids reserve is put back into the biosolids reserve to help kind of grow that fund. Closed landfill is, again, the budget that manages the activities around maintaining our closed landfills. These costs continue, they continue to increase without a source of revenue. So all of the expenses are paid out of that closed landfill reserve. One of the reasons that we are increasing the solid waste management fee is to have a steady stream of revenue into this reserve, because the only way that you fund the closed landfill reserve is from when the landfill is open. It hasn't been open for 28 years. So we're needing to put more money into this reserve. The EPA has just issued the notice for rulemaking for drinking water standards and for CERCLA, which is the Superfund law. And I'm going to be taking a look at that and seeing if there's opportunity for us to comment, but that is going to dictate how we need to treat the PFAS that is in leachate and what that looks like. So that is why we are actively now wanting to add more money back into that closed landfill reserve, because we do not know what that cost is going to be to treat that material. And maintenance and roll-off, and again, we are now treating this in the budget similarly to the way we treat the administrative functions, which is as a service to the district. So this budget will now, instead of being allocated across the operations programs, is funded through the operating reserve. So those are all the operating budgets. And this is the administrative program overview. Next. The major component of this is the solid waste management fee. It is the only source of revenue coming into this particular program, and it does fund the majority of the programs in the department. Again, this is just kind of who we are. There's not much to, again, the only revenue is that solid waste management fee, and this is, we're just going to go through what it covers, and these are the changes. We're looking to add a software developer as we're getting even a bit more complicated, if that is possible, and in anticipation of wanting to have a better handle on inbound material at the MRF when we move to a new MRF, and then just working on our existing structures and modernizing those. And another department in the administration, compliance. So looking at adding a little more money into legal services. Again, ordinance changes, we're going to look again at flow control and having our lawyers do another kind of look at, just the authorities and confirming our ability to work through flow control if needed. We've also added a compliance coordinator to the budget. He started this year, but formally in this coming year. So there will be 3 people in that department for fiscal 25. Finance, the main additional revenue into finance is we booked the interest revenue into this department. And we're looking at, we're budgeting 120,000. We did just re-up our investments for another 6-month treasury bond because the interest rates were still pretty decent, right around 5%. So those will mature in September. We will be paying very, very close attention as to what the Fed decides to do towards the end of the year. And if they do decide to drop rates, the going wisdom, if there is any, is that it'll be closer to the end of the year. So these may mature right at a really great time to be able to lock into hopefully another pretty decently sized interest rate. So we will most likely reinvest again in September and roll those over. So again, right now we're getting about 5%, really lower, and then the money market is 1.9 or something. So anything over that is great. Next, please. Outreach and communication. The decrease in staffing was essentially a retirement, and decrease in travel expense. But we are looking at overall for the district at increasing our training. And then we are booking into this budget increase to marketing and advertising costs for educating around the new MRF. And this is just a very, very quick overview of the capital projection. There was a larger conversation, actually I think it is in the packet, on the capital projects. And that is really just to kind of show you where our balance will be should everything happen. And that line that is new is the second one, works in progress. And that are projects that sometimes our projects carry over multiple years. So for example, a project that was budgeted in fiscal 23, but we didn't get to until maybe the end of 23, it leaked into 24, or we didn't get to until 24. It was still accounted for in the balances in 23. But not expensed until 24. So we want to show kind of what is literally in the works that has already been prior approved that we are anticipating needing to pay out in this upcoming fiscal year. Next, please. And this is the reserve transfers in and out. So transfers from, so we're decreasing the reserves, and this is what we're anticipating where the decreases are going to come from. And I want to point you again, as always, folks, to the Community Cleanup Fund. We have not yet ever exhausted that 95 in one single fiscal year, and we would definitely like to do that. So I want to continue to encourage you throughout the year to be looking for opportunities to utilize your Community Cleanup Fund dollars, and we are happy to give you your totals at any given time. But we really want to see those dollars used up. They are growing, and so I do want to thank the commissioners who are actively involved in and looking for different projects. But we haven't yet quite even cracked 50% of that. So we want to use more of that. And next, please. And Ken, I'll get to you in a moment. Thank you very much. This is like the last slide. When we're talking about needing to draw down on the reserve, so that was that small, and it is small, but I don't want to hide that it is a shortfall. If, again, everything goes completely according to how it is budgeted. So where are we conservatively under budgeting? Where are we conservatively over budgeting? Under budgeting on MRF commodity revenue, so that average commodity revenue, it goes up and down. For example, the first 2 quarters of this fiscal year, the average commodity revenue rate was around $55 a ton. It shot up in December, shot up in January, shot up in March. The average for the first week of March was $110 a ton. So, we're averaging 75 for fiscal 25. Could it come in over that? It could. But because we don't want to overestimate revenue, we feel more comfortable budgeting conservatively. However, the forecast is, although it was prior to yesterday with the unfortunate accident in Baltimore, it was that there would be continued to be strong average commodity revenue for the next 6 to 7 months. So leading into a hopefully robust first 2 quarters of fiscal 25, which was not the case for fiscal 24. So cautiously optimistic, however, conservatively under budgeting. Inbound tons as well, we slightly under budgeted, I think, but we did secure a contract with Addison County Solid Waste District for their 4,200 tons. So we know that that is additional amount coming in that we did not have last year. So I think there's potential for additional, working with additional sister districts on similar arrangements. So I think we potentially could see either the same amount of tons or a little bit more. And again, the ORF, we're working on increasing our tons there, so we're conservatively budgeting that. And I'm not sure how APR reimbursements will change due to the new laws and when those might kick in. So there could be, it won't be a lot, but it could be a little bit more on APR reimbursements. And as we mentioned, where do we over budget? So we overestimate on wages and benefits because we want to make sure we're fully representing that program. The travel and training, we don't routinely spend that budget. And that is something that was mentioned at our finance committee a couple of times, and I definitely take that to heart. And I've mentioned that to our management team to continue to find opportunities for utilizing our travel and training budget. Really, the training is important, and we have increased it. So we're, again, being hopeful that we're going to utilize that fully. And then, as I mentioned, we do not fully utilize our community cleanup fund, but we would like to. So with that, that is the overview. And I did see that Ken had a raised hand.
Hey, I don't know if you could go back to that slide about the reserves, because that was my question was about. And if not, I'll just ask the question. Oh, am I muted?
Nope,
No.
you're good.
Yeah. Can we do the slide or not?
We are trying.
Getting
The
there.
reserves.
There we go. It
It
would have been down towards the end.
Yeah, second to last, I think. Third to last. Yeah, third to last. Yeah. Yeah. So the reserves and the up and down in reserves are the hardest thing for me to catch up on the budget. And when I see the operating reserve decreasing by 600,000, and I'm trying to figure out where that comes from, and I think you've told me that where that reserve money would come from would be excess income. So then I think, where does excess income come from? And I'm not exactly sure that I understand if it's ever going to come. I saw the drop-off centers had 200 grand, but I was thinking I'm kind of going around in circles because I know that money is going to the post-closure landfill. Then there was talk about, well, we're upping the solid waste management fee to help post-closure. but solid waste management fee is also what funds this operating reserve, which is going down. So I'm kind of thinking like, what's our hope or expectation with this kind of budgeting? That are these reserves going to stay at a certain level, or are these reserves something that go away over time? How do we think about them?
Great, excellent question, thank you. And so the reserves hopefully should never go away, right? That is, we want to be very responsible when we're managing, particularly municipal budget, to make sure that we always have enough money to cover, essentially to cover our operations for a set period of time. So to always have money reserved, literally reserved for that purpose. And when we talked about establishing our priority list for reserves a couple of years ago, we set up what we're colloquially calling a waterfall effect. So we have our reserves have a priority listing, and so and a minimum and a maximum. So the minimum, for example, in the solid waste management fee reserve is 3 months of expenses, to have that be our minimum, and a maximum of 6 months of expenses. And the reason that we had the minimum of 3 and the maximum of 6 was, if we needed to, for example, establish a per capita fee, we would need X amount of time to kind of go through that process. So we figured if we have 6 months of solid waste management revenue and we had to issue, institute a per capita fee, that would give us time to go through that public process. Other reserves have similar mins and max. So when the solid waste management fee reserve, for example, hits its max, then anything that is not needed to bring that reserve up to that maximum amount will then fall into the next priority reserve, which is the operating reserve. Some of the excess revenue, which is basically revenue in excess of income in excess of expenses. So you've got your income coming in, and then you've got your expenses that are then, tallied against that income. And then what's left over, what in the private sector we call profit, is called, revenue in excess of expenses. We can direct that from operations into the operating reserve. So that would be where the DOC excess revenue would go. The operating reserve is basically funded through excess revenue from the MRF. And so it was partially seeded with MRF excess revenue, excess income, and could be seeded with solid waste management revenue as well. So it kind of has both. Nola, you can probably explain this much better than I am.
Your hand is up, Nola.
Yeah, go ahead.
I also just wanted to add that this waterfall effect that we're calling it. It's not something that is a policy. It's a procedure, basically a guideline that we've created. So if in a single year we decide that we don't need to use funds, or we don't need to increase funds within one of the reserves, we can move that money somewhere else. So I just wanted to clarify that it's not something that is set every single year. Sarah and I look at, where we stand and decide, do we actually need more money in the landfill post-closure, and the operating reserve is going to be okay this year. We don't really need to put more money into it, because even if we reduced it by almost $600,000, there would be well over $1 million still sitting in that reserve. So if what we needed at the end of this year was to move most of that $300,000 from the solid waste management excess into the landfill post-closure, we can do that. And Ken, I'm happy to go through the waterfall effect and just how we sort of move those funds around at the end of a fiscal year, or if more members of the board also want to be part of that discussion, I'm happy to have that conversation with whomever is interested, so that you can have a better understanding of how we move those monies around at the beginning of every fiscal year.
And I have a mini discussion of that in the packet. So not in the letter, but in the overview. So if you're on page, stand by, please. So the reserve funds conversation starts on page 12 of the budget packet. So not of the board packet, but of the budget packet, the supplemental one. It does look at or show the reserves and kind of how they are set up. Rachel?
Sorry, now I'm trying to find page 12 because I was curious about this. So I understand that it's you know, a sum of money, and then each, there's a max and a min based on all these little buckets of money, and that's fungible based on how that money then needs to be prioritized. But that if you put all those little buckets in a big bucket, how that changes over time, I think is my question here. Like, does the reserve, is it generally the same based on those min max? And then how the water flows out of the bucket to get you to zero? Is that static, or is there a lot of change year to year in what that total bucket pool is?
Yeah, there is certainly change. And with the main change being that the largest contributor of excess to that has been the MRF. So as the fortunes of the MRF rise and fall, that is where any kind of excess that is outside of the max of the reserves, that is affected by that rising and falling. And there are a couple of reserves that are what we call restricted. So the restricted reserves, the money that's in there can only be used for that program. So the biosolids reserve, for example, is a restricted reserve. Only the biosolids program can access that money for its needs. The closed landfill reserve, I have restricted that reserve. It used to be unrestricted. It used to be accessible. And that is not a best practice. So when I came on board, I restricted it. So that means that the money in that fund can be used and is used for expenses in an annual, during the year, for associated with that reserve, but it cannot be used for anything else except for that function. But everything else, like you said, is unrestricted and can be used for any of the needs of the district. We have also assigned some of these reserves. So you'll see on that page 13, it starts to talk about, and again, this is 13 of the budget packet, where some reserves are assigned. So the operating reserve, those funds that are in there are assigned to the operating programs. They are not restricted to the operating programs. So if we need to use operating reserve money for the closed landfill, we could. If we needed it to use it for biosolids, we could. If we need to use it for capital, we could. But we're trying to kind of dedicate that for that program. And then there's an undesignated fund. It is unrestricted and unassigned. And that is where, before we set up this structure, basically everything else dropped into that reserve, and it had this very large balance, which didn't make sense because it really that should not be a large balance. You shouldn't have, in my professional opinion, a large amount of money that has no purpose. We want our money to have a purpose. So that one does have a min and a max. So when that undesignated fund reaches that max, then what Nola and I would do is we would flow any money back up, and the next reserve back up, and that priority is capital. So the goal is to continue to make sure that out of any of the reserves, if they're robust, that one is, the capital is robust.
It's pretty complicated, and I was wondering if I could request some visualizations around this being included, which I'm not seeing in this report. It would be great to see for the unrestricted funds change over time, and even maybe a breakdown of what the different funds and if they're restricted or not over time.
Well, if they're restricted, they're not going to change. Do you mean like how much is going in and out and how much is being used, or I guess I'm not sure. I'm not understanding the question.
Yes, I create data visualizations for my job. So I'm trying not to be too specific with this request, because I think you folks with your knowledge command of that would be able to create a visualization that just make it a little bit easier to intake the information you're imparting here. I'm a visual thinker, so I would love, change over time, and then if you can add in some information about what the different buckets are, that would be helpful in a way that would be helpful to understand. That'd be appreciated.
Okay, so you're just looking for a different view of the information.
Yeah, I don't see that kind of total bucket change over time data here. And then additional information about what the buckets are would be great, but not necessary.
Okay. I'll connect with you later, maybe to get more clarity.
Rick, your hand was up.
Yes, thank you.
I'm sorry, actually, Katie, I think, did I notice your hand up first and then we'll go to Rick? I'm sorry, Rick, but
I'll defer, that's fine.
Yeah, thank you. So back to the legal fees slide. Question about why we're talking about flow control again, and if you're talking about organics or MSW, what's the I'm not really sure. Was there a conversation about why that was going to be a discussion again, or?
Sure.
Just curious.
So flow control has been in our ordinance for recyclables for a number of years. This past year, the board amended the ordinance to add flow control potential if we needed to organics as well. So what we're looking for the attorneys to do is to just provide an updated view of what is going on outside of Vermont in the world, not the world, but the United States, and to just make sure that should we have a need to implement or enact flow control, that we are in good legal standing. It's more research on that item, Katie.
Okay, thank you.
Rick, we'll go to you now.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to ask about the MRF tipping fee increase and the $90 level. And by way of introduction, I have no objection to the $90 level. I think that you budgeted it. I'm comfortable with that. That's totally fine. However, we've talked, we all have a pretty good understanding at this point of the process for changing the solid waste management fee. What is the reasoning about not changing the MRF tip fee during the year? Is there any sort of process around that? Clearly, it's not in the ordinance, so it's a whole different matter. But I ask partly because it feels like if we're pegged at the bottom, toward the bottom end of the range of MRF tip fees that are out there, there is some margin there in the event the bottom falls out of something and we need to shore up some income somewhere. Potentially, in theory, we could raise the tip fee, but it sounds like the practice is not to do that. So can you just talk about that a little bit?
Sure. And yeah, the practice has been to not do that. Partly it's a function of being a municipal entity and wanting to preserve stability in our fee structure for anyone who is affected by our fees. And I think Lee could probably talk to a great sense of nervousness if we were to act like a merchant MRF or a private MRF and be raising our tip fee on or lowering, because that also happens. It rises and falls, as I said, with the whims of the commodity market. It does provide some stability to that point. We could always enter into a municipal contract with the city of Burlington to guarantee a tip fee or tip fee range should we feel that it makes more sense to operate as a merchant MRF or a private sector MRF with regards to tip fees. The other controlling factor is when we change the tip fee, we have to provide Casella with, I think it's 45 days notice in advance of changing the fee, because they then need to change it in their systems and it's not always seamless. They operate the scale on our behalf. That is a bit of a controlling factor, makes it a little bit tricky, but it's not, a limiting factor. It's not a reason to not do it. And we have, in the past several years, had to raise our tip fee a few times. In 1 year, actually, I think we raised it twice in one fiscal year, which would have been 3 times going up, once in July 1, and then twice in that following spring, because the bottom crashed out of the commodities market. So it really has been more of a past practice and a nod to our largest municipal customer, which is the city of Burlington, in keeping a fee the same set for the fiscal year. But there's nothing saying that we need to do it that way.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to recognize Kelton next. Ken, I see your hand has been up, but I do want to give all commissioners a first crack at asking their questions. Then we'll cycle back to you, Ken. But Kelton, go ahead.
Yeah, I got more of a comment. Is that fine at this time, or should I wait?
Of course.
All right. I just want to say, first off, thank you guys for all the hard work in the finance committee and staff to get the budget, where it is today. I just, feel like I have to say, coming to this meeting as a resident of Williston, I'm just torn. Just seeing both our town budget and our school budget go down this year and over the past month or 2 months, reading constant front porch forum posts about people struggling to make ends meet, about the rising cost of living here in Vermont, about talking to people I know, young people looking to leave the state. And I just feel like I have to make the comment that I would love to see us go back and see what we could do to sharpen our pencils a little bit and come with a revised budget, just because I'm seeing our towns make these tough decisions, our school districts make these tough decisions. I know you guys have done a great job, and I really believe in the work that we're doing, but I feel like everything I'm seeing, everything I'm reading for the town of Williston, representing the town of Williston, I just feel like I have to voice that on behalf of our constituents.
Thank you, Kelton. I understand completely. And I will just remind the board and the public that we are not increasing drop-off center fees, which are an immediate impact to our residential customers. So that is staying the same. We are not increasing. And we did add service to a number of our towns. We added service to Milton, and we'll be adding service back into Burlington. So we do recognize that we are an affordable option for a lot of folks, and we take that responsibility seriously. So I hear you, and thank you.
Ken, we'll come around to you for another question.
John,
Great. Great. I'm glad we're still on the slide. Two simple questions on the reserves, I think. So in general, it's a big pool of money, but it's in different buckets to support that is there when there's not enough money in the budget. Is that right? Basically, these pools are to support when the budget falls short.
Yes and no. Yes and no. I mean,
like the landfill closure is being decreased because we needed some of that money from the landfill closure reserve.
Well, the closed landfill reserve has always been the bucket of money that was used to pay expenses for activities around the closed landfill. So
Right.
That's its own.
Okay, I get it. You're right. That's its own thing. Does it mean anything that our total reserve decreases 711 and our reserve increases 428? In other words, does it mean that about $300,000 is kind of disappearing from our overall asset base, and is that normal?
No, I'm going to defer that question. That's a more technical question to you. So hopefully I can see if she's still on, but.
Yes, so based on our net loss, it will be decreasing our overall, let's say, equity, which is where our reserves sit. So that is correct. It is reducing by about 300,000 if, as Sarah has mentioned, everything goes exactly as we've put into the budget. But we've seen in past years that unfortunately people don't typically use the full 95,000. So the expectation is that maybe we would see maybe only 40 or so thousand coming out of that. So that would reduce our loss so that it wouldn't be quite as close to 300,000 as it is now. There is some other changes that we may see, like the MRF may have some more money coming in from the material sales. But yes, the idea is that loss that we're seeing would reduce the total equity that we have available to us. And Ken, I would say that I've been here for almost 4 years, and this is unusual in those 4 years. In past years, we have actually seen a lot of excess, and it would basically, that's what Sarah was saying, is that it was sort of sitting in this undesignated space, and we moved the majority of it into our capital so that we have a pretty robust capital reserve right now. So the hope is that next year the material sales will increase, or maybe some of the costs will become more steady and we won't continue to see this cost increase, and we can begin to put money into our reserves again.
Thank you. Thank you for clearing that up.
I don't see anybody else's hand up. I would just jump in now and point out that for the benefit of all the board members, understanding that the responsibility for really digging into the weeds at the board level falls to the Finance Committee, which is comprised of Paul Stabler, Leslie Nolte, and Rick McCraw. And they've spent an awful lot of time going through, we've spent a lot of time tonight on the reserve balances and on our balance sheet, but also in line by line in the operating budget. Paul, I didn't give you a heads up, but I'll give you the opportunity if you want to offer any comments about the process that the Finance Committee went through.
Oh yeah, I'll just say a few short things. First of all, we held a all-day session with staff on Valentine's Day, and it was really good discussion. We had some questions, good questions for staff, and some suggestions. For instance, one thing we suggested too, I think originally staff came with what was it, 85? Forget the ACR. What was it? Anyway, we suggested you raise the ACR by $5 per ton, and staff went back and looked at that and did adopt that. So things like that, we did discuss, and again, thought it was a great process. So.
Thank you, Paul. Right now, we've been discussing the presentation that Sarah has made. We do not yet have a motion to adopt this budget.
So it would be a motion to basically authorize the budget to be transmitted to the cities and towns. So this board doesn't actually adopt the budget. We have to go to our member communities, and then they authorize the budget to become active.
So last year's motion was to accept the FY25 budget as presented, meaning that then we can take it out to the communities.
So I would, at this point, welcome a motion to accept the FY25 budget as presented in your board packet.
So moved, Charlotte.
Second, Heinsberg.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded to accept the budget proposal as presented tonight. Certainly an opportunity more for discussion on this proposed budget. I guess, Sarah, just walk us through, for the benefit of the full board and the public who might be looking at this at some point, how this budget then really gets approved.
Right. So once the board accepts the budget, and then essentially authorizes me to go out to cities and towns, and from there we have 45 days for all of our member towns to approve the budget. And when so I go and present each one, and it has been made much easier with the advent of hybrid meetings and remote. I used to get in my car and go to each council or each select board, and so they will then they get a package just like you all do. It's their opportunity to ask questions like you have, and then they either vote it up or down. And we need 10 of our communities to pass that budget, to authorize the budget. When we have 10, it is then approved for adoption as of July 1. Each city and town has one vote. So it's not a weighted vote. It's each one has the same equal vote. So if they do not authorize the budget, if they do not approve the budget, they then have the opportunity, and actually they must, submit to the board the reasons why the specific reason why they are declining to approve the budget, and to say, this is what we would like to see changed. So it has to be a very specific item in the budget that they want to see changed. For example, they don't want to see an increase in the solid waste management. Oh, that's an ordinance. That's not a good one. They don't want to see an increase to the MRF tip fee. They would say, we think it should be something different, or we think it should be $80 or $50. They would have to transmit that to the board, and they have a very short window. I forget how much time they have even to do that, but they have a very short window to submit that objection.
So the authority and the power to approve this budget ultimately rests with the towns.
With the legislative bodies of the town, so either with the city council or a select board.
Thank you. So we have a motion on the floor here. Is there questions, comments, further discussion? Again, the motion is to accept the budget as presented tonight. I think we're ready then to vote on this. All those in favor of accepting the budget, please say aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, please say nay and raise your hand.
Nay.
Thank you. We've got that recorded. Are there any abstentions? I declare the motion then has passed and the budget has been accepted, and authorizes Sarah then spend a lot of time meeting with every authority, every town and city authority to review the budget.
And Amy works on that schedule. She prepares that. And so she works with your clerks and arranges the time for me to go to the meetings. She will send out ahead of your city or town's day, the day that it is, so that if you want to attend, you are also more than welcome to be there. And actually, I encourage you to be there as your community's representative. And then you can make a comment, you can discuss, you can just listen, whatever you would like to do. But Amy will send that notice out. So when she sends out the packet to the clerk, she always copies the commissioner and the alternate on that email.
Thank you. We're now ready to move on to item number 6 on our agenda, which is the organics recycling facility. That was scheduled to begin at 7:15. We're 2 minutes over, but I'm sure we'll be able to make this up.
Well.
So we'll turn it over to start off with Dan. I take it that he'll walk us through this piece of tonight's business.
Yes, thanks for the opportunity to talk about this on a budget night. I know it can be a lot to try to take in all of the pages associated with the budget and then switch gears and think about something else. But thank you for being willing to do that. And the good news is that we're not looking for necessarily any decisions being made tonight. It's for information only at this point, unless the board feels so inclined to move forward with adoption tonight. The goal in this process is that we have something in place, if not tonight, then a month from now at the next board meeting, so that by July 1st, we have plenty of time to work with all of the haulers who haul organics to our facility and make sure that they are fully aware about all of the pieces of this contamination policy, which they hopefully are already because we've been in conversation with them, but that they can start really realizing what the impacts would be depending on the levels of contamination reaching our facility, and use our services and resources to actually limit the contamination before we start enacting any fines starting in July. So this has been a long time coming. We've been working on this, I think in the memo I say for over a year. It's been actually, we have a memo of a draft contamination policy that is many years old. And we've really been spending a lot more time on it over the last year, and getting input from all sorts of folks across the country who have similar policies or have contamination policies at compost facilities in other jurisdictions, as well as talking extensively with both haulers throughout our community, as well as individual generators, some of the larger generators, and really trying to find all the places where contamination policy makes the most sense where we will have the most impact in the ultimate goal of cleaning up the organic stream that is coming into our facility. So as mentioned in the memo, we have taken a lot of steps over the last several years to improve the quality of our outgoing material. We have bought machinery, we have modified our process, we have hired personnel, including our new full-time quality control and contamination reduction staff, Allison Smith, who's with us tonight, and Kim Stacy's also with us tonight in case there are questions specific to our policy, as they have been very instrumental in its development. But through all of these changes, though we've made huge progress, we're still struggling with a huge amount of non-compostable products that come in our doors or through our gate every day that we are open. And so we've recognized this for a long time. We now finally have in place language that we think is going to be effective at helping reduce the amount coming in. So just a quick background or a refresher perhaps is that we take in food waste from all over Chittenden County and beyond, but mostly within Chittenden County. The majority of it comes through our gate through private third-party haulers. And it is collected at restaurants, cafeterias, grocery stores, schools, and other institutional sources. And because we don't control the hauling, we have very little control over the quality of what gets to us without something such as this policy. So we are completely reliant on the haulers for the majority of the food waste that comes in to do the job and do the work of kind of policing the quality of what's coming in. So we've heard in those discussions with those haulers that without a policy in place that has some sort of stick, if it's or some sort of financial penalty, that they have very little power in affecting change for their own customers, where the generators where this food waste is being produced. As such, we've come up with what we think is going to work well, and we have set some financial fines that we hope are going to meet that goal of inflicting just enough pain that people will pay attention and make change, but not so much that it's overly burdensome. Well, I think I just want to start by opening it up to questions. We do have some slides that we can share to help answer some of what I guess are going to be the questions. I can go through basically the real basics of this are that we are using volumetric thresholds to determine whether or not to impose a penalty. And this was after much trial and error and in counting individual contaminants, but this is what we landed on. And that's the slide in front of you. That shows what those levels of threshold are. So it's anything over 5% contamination gets some sort of charge, and then over 10% contamination is deemed excessively contaminated and has the option of being relocated from our facility to landfill disposal. And so that's the basics of it. There's more to it than that, of course, sorry, I'm going to go back briefly and just say that we also recognize that in addition to much of the food waste that does arrive at our facility, which is actually quite good in general, there are a few specific generators or haulers that are just time and time again some of the more difficult ones. And those happen to be schools for perhaps obvious reasons. That school, when you've got a cafeteria full of hundreds of kids all putting their materials into one bin, it can be hard to control that. So that's one of the kind of targeted areas of this. Another common issue we have is that we will have, because these haulers usually have routes and they pick up lots of material from lots of facilities, they may have, let's say, 40 different stops on their route, and 39 of them could be pristine, but then they get one route or one stop that happens to throw in a couple of bags of trash in the wrong bin, and then suddenly you, instead of just contaminating one stop's food waste, you're contaminating 30 generators' food waste. And so we've built in mechanisms to deal with that, mostly in the form of incidental, what we're calling incidental contamination, where it's a lesser fine, but targeted for particular wastes that are highly problematic. And you can see the list there of those identified items. And then lastly, the cumulative non-response is a mechanism that we're implementing to make sure that folks who are repeat offenders, who probably have, particularly some of our larger generators who have larger budgets and might not be moved by a $50 fine, some mechanism for growing that fine over time to make sure that it is responded to if it is a particularly offensive contaminant that is not resolved. So I know that's a mouthful and probably a little bit hard to follow, but that is, if you look through the memo, there is a flow chart, both in very hard to read font, but then also in a standalone attachment at the end of the memo that shows kind of how we go through the process of when a load arrives, determining what the level of contamination is, and therefore what fines to attach to it, if any. And one last thing before we open up to questions is that the intent in all of this is very much not to assess fines. We are not budgeting for revenue associated with this contamination policy. We don't want to be assessing fines for any of this. What we want is clean food waste. And we think, particularly in working in conjunction with our outreach department, that we will be able to target some of these more problematic sources, and that working with the haulers who now have kind of this stick that they can pass along, that we can work with them to fix the problem ones and therefore not contaminate the larger stream, which again is by and large very good. So yes, I think we'll open it up to questions if.
Yep, we've got 3 folks raise their hand. We're going to go in order: Tom, then Margie, then Rick. So Tom, you're first.
Okay, how is the percent contamination determined?
That's a great question, and as you can imagine, it is a difficult thing. Unlike, like say in a lab setting where you have a sample of something and you can just measure out the individual components very quickly and easily, come up with your number. We're dealing with very heterozygous material coming in that can be very different depending on the source. Sometimes it can appear to be a soup, very liquidy. Other times it can look like what's in that picture and be very much not a soup, but it's always different. And so we started down the path of actually counting every contaminant that we could find in loads. And I should also point out that we've done, and mostly Allison over the last many months has been the one who's waded through these loads, sometimes with actual waders, and counted the individual components of contaminants, which is not a fun job. So we're very grateful for her helping us develop this. But so we started by counting individual contaminants, and then after many of those examples, we realized that ongoing counts were going to be very difficult for the volume of food that comes through our facility. So actually counting every individual piece of cutlery was not going to be sustainable. Rather, we needed some volumetric method. And so we devised a way to bring known volumetric containers, starting with the count. So we did this, I don't know, maybe 15 different times or 20 different times, and then filled up buckets, measured both the weights and volumes of all the contamination, compared it to the weight and volume of the incoming loads, and kind of established a rubric of what the visual 5% or 10% threshold look like. And we've then back checked that after we developed that, and it's been pretty close. It leaves a little bit of interpretation for determining what 7% versus 8% certainly, but it is very clear what is a 10% contamination load, for instance, compared to a 5% contamination load. So and that is kind of in line with how it's done in other parts of the country where nobody's counting individual contaminants because in some of these loads, there are thousands of individual contaminants.
I mean, similar to how it's done at the MRF as well. And
That's
so
true.
the contamination policy was kind of modeled after what the board approved for the MRF contamination policy. So to be consistent across policies.
Correct.
Margie, then Rick, then Liz, then Paul Stabler. But go ahead, Mark.
First, I want to express my complete sympathy with this idea. Secondly, it just pains me sometimes to look at what is in the wrong bin in public places. But anyway, so if I understand you correctly, the haulers want this. Is that fair to say?
They all understand it very much, and I don't know if one, like any imposition of a fine, I don't know, anyone would say they want it, but I think, or at least they wouldn't want their customers to ever hear them saying that they want it. But they like the ability to have us be the ones cracking the whip as it were, and then being able to say like, hey, they're charging us for this, so now you really got to stop. And so they like that there's a mechanism that will allow them to make some changes. They're all competing in an open marketplace, and they are very reluctant to ever say no to customers, I think, in general. And so this gives them a mechanism to kind of push back and say, hey, we really we appreciate you as a customer, and we're glad that you are diverting your organics, but it's just not working out. For instance, hopefully that's not going to be the outcome, but it could get to that point. And hopefully what would happen first would be like, hey, they just charged us $70 this month for your load. We know, it's got your name on the cup or on the whatever. We know it's coming from you. Our driver sees it every week. Work with us, or let us work with you, or let us bring in CSWD's specialists to help figure out how we can solve this ongoing issue. So yes, I think they like that it's not them pushing it, and they like that there might be some beneficial outcome for everybody. I don't know that they like the idea of being fined.
Right, that makes sense. So they anticipate a follow-up kind of education or conversation process that will improve outcomes here.
Yes.
And presumably CSWD can also be helpful in, to them, I suppose, in doing that education. Anyway.
Oh, yes, for sure. In fact, we have some, we've been working on this long enough, and that we've been talking with haulers long enough that we've already have some early success things that give us some hope. There were some individual schools that, in talking to the haulers and looking, week after week, we're like, well, this Tuesday afternoon load from this route is really tough. Do you happen to know which school, because it's obvious that it's school material, like what's in this photo. Not too many places generate that many chocolate milk boxes. And they were able to tell us, well, yeah, actually I'm not going to say it on TV, but there are particular schools that do better jobs than others. And we have an incredible school outreach staff person within the district who knows a lot of the personnel who work in all these schools. And she was desperate for this information because she's had great success in the past working with custodial staff and teachers and administration in individual schools in developing programs where they do a phenomenal job. Like, you would not believe the difference coming from a school that tries and does well, and then a school where obviously there's something's not working right, and or maybe they just don't have the program in place. And so she's been able to go back to those problem schools and say, hey, we've got some information. Here's some pictures, because pictures go a long way. And they're like, look at what's showing up as compost at our compost facility. And they are often aghast to see what is coming from their own school or place of business. And yeah, they're able to make some change, and we were able to see some immediate change. Some of it is not immediate, some of it is going to take longer, and we think the financial component will help speed things up, hopefully. But there are, even without imposition and just more conversation with the haulers and trying to figure out exactly where they're coming from, we've seen some early success. Because people do really want to do the right thing, even, particularly school kids don't, like, they're the ones who are, I think, not feeling great when they find out that their school compost effort is not as good as the one down one town over.
Yeah.
So
Thanks. That's very helpful.
yes.
Rick and then Liz.
Dan, I sympathize with you having to deal with this kind of issue. I was struggling with the fact that the problem seems to be with the generators, yet the fines are going to the haulers. I think you largely filled that gap with what you were just saying as to how it is that penalizing the haulers can be leverage to affect change on the generator side. Is it safe to say that in the majority of cases, you really can track the contamination back to the individual generator?
That's a tricky one to answer. Every hauler is very different in terms of both what they collect, what their types of accounts they have, even what type of collection vehicle they have, how big their loads are. And so it's let's start with one of the smaller residential ones that you may have seen popping up in the last several years after Act 148 came into full being. They go through and pick up 5-gallon buckets one at a time, and then they actively dump them into larger containers, and they can see pretty much every single thing that goes into one of those containers. And then, they wait until their vehicle is full, and then they bring them to us, and, they probably have 100 stops on their route or something. And yet they could tell you with confidence pretty much where every contaminant came from. Whereas some of the larger hauling companies who have the larger vehicles and might have, I don't know, maybe 40, 50 stops on a route, they are often tipping the bigger carts, which, are, in addition to not being translucent, or just have a lot of material in them. And some of them do a better job than others in terms of like flipping lids and seeing what it looks like from on top. Some of them actually have cameras on board, and they can see as material gets dumped into the hauling body. And then once it's all commingled, the haulers are definitely going to be the ones who are going to have the best idea about where stuff comes from. So it's going to require ongoing communication with them. The best we can do is generally, if we see a clue, grocery stores often in the past have had, their logo on a label on a package on a bakery item, and that makes it pretty easy. Or a receipt from a restaurant might be in a thing. So there's some detective work involved, but really working with the haulers, they're not going to know every time, but they have a much better likelihood of knowing where a certain contaminant came from. So in terms of them passing on fines accurately, it's not going to be without difficulty. But because we don't do the hauling ourselves, we are definitely relying on them for a lot of that piece of it. And we work with some of them haul single source streams, like the university all comes in on one truck. The hospital food waste comes in on one truck. So that's very useful because those are large volumes, and we can very quickly know what the contamination level is for a specific generator. But that's, for a smaller business, there's some more guesswork involved, particularly on the hauler's point, from the hauler's standpoint.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Liz, then Paul Stabler, then Lee.
Hi, I'm glad to hear that the kind of outreach team is finding effectiveness in going back to some of those schools and places that there's been a lot of contamination. So that's really exciting. I did have a question though, just about if you find that, or has this been thought of haulers who are continuously having to find, say, some kind of serial contaminators, people who are just continually not getting it, not picking up the idea that they could make change. Do you ever see that the haulers might stop picking up stuff from that particular entity? Do you is another layer of beyond the fine that there would be just changes in behaviors of who will pick up whom on what route? So I just wondered if that's an incentive to say if you keep doing this, we're just not going to be able to pick up your stuff, or if it's too business oriented that would never happen.
Well, I think that's going to depend very much on the hauler. And again, that would be up to them to make that determination. However, we do still have folks within CSWD whose job it is to make sure that businesses are complying with all the rules. And so if we were informed and knew of a particular generator that was not complying with, for you, this body has been made aware of when there is, problems with recycling at a given business. And so when we are made aware of that, there are means for following up. But usually, no, it's going to be the hauler who will have to do that work and make that determination. However, we have heard from other compost facilities in other parts of the country that indeed has been a very useful tool for the haulers. Is that they say we have this big load, we have this big route. And let's say we're picking up 8 tons of food waste every Tuesday, and we know that 95% of it is perfectly good and well below 5% contamination, but we keep getting dinged with this contamination, and we've determined that it's coming from you. You've got 1 month probation to clean it up, otherwise you're not coming back, or we're going to drop you as an account. And yeah, it has been very effective to do that in other areas. It remains to be seen if that will be the case here, but we're certainly hopeful that they will come up with that sort of policy for their own businesses where appropriate.
That answers your question, Liz? I think so. Paul, Stabler, then Lee.
Yeah, I just had 2 questions, probably quick ones. First is, do you see much contamination coming in loads that come from our drop-off centers?
Great question. They are actually quite clean. Similar to, we have a large receptacle at our facility again now after a little break during COVID. But and yeah, all of the CSWD collection facilities are largely clean. Not perfect, certainly. The biggest problems we have in those streams are liner bags that are not compostable liner bags. And that is mostly because we think, mostly residential folks are using those services, and they are going through all the effort to separate things out to begin with. So they're probably paying a little bit more attention than somebody who's just eating at a restaurant and then maybe thinking about where to throw their material in the right bin or not. But unlike a restaurant who hopefully has gotten all the education about, make sure you always use this right liner bag in your cart, the homeowner doesn't have that ongoing education. We can't reach all the homeowners as easily. And although we hopefully will be doing some more outreach to this effect, where we can try to prevent folks who want to do the right thing, but are just going on Amazon and typing in the word compost bag, and then maybe ending up buying something that doesn't actually compost because there's some greenwashing in that sphere, unfortunately. So by and large, very clean what we're seeing from the drop-off centers.
Okay, thanks. And then in other areas of the country that have implemented such a similar contamination policy, have they noticed an increase in organics in the trash stream, and/or would we be able to identify such an increase in our trash stream?
Great question. I think that one is tricky because most of the folks we talk to who have done this do not come from areas where there is a moratorium on organics in the landfill. So the incentives for complying are different. It's mostly out of goodwill or maybe local jurisdictional programs that encourage it through other means, but so I don't know the answer to that in the other places. I would imagine occasionally, yeah, like if there's not, for instance, if there was a problem business for the given hauler who had been given the warning, if they are in Kansas and the other option is like a $20 landfill tip fee, they're probably, yeah, it probably would just go to the landfill. Here where landfill prices are much higher and we have a law that says you can't just throw your food in the landfill, I think the calculations hopefully are going to be a little bit different there. And there's not a whole lot of enforcement on statewide in terms of people not complying with the organics diversion, but I think that could change over time. So I don't know. We don't have a great mechanism for measuring how much food waste would end up in the landfill stream. Other than occasional waste sorts done by the state, or historically by the district that says how much food waste is in there, but we don't know if that is what the source of that is. So that'd be a really hard one to figure out, I think, but a great question.
Thank you.
Lee, you're up.
Yes, just listening to you talking about the haulers and the different size haulers. You got your larger commercial haulers, residential haulers, and you got your mid-size. Don't want to mention any names, but have you thought of, with the hauler outreach and the smaller haulers possibly seeing the contamination in, like you said, the 5-gallon buckets, or maybe some of the bigger totes? I know in recycling, they have the oops stickers. Is that something maybe that haulers can get? And if they notice contamination, especially in like a 5-gallon bucket, slap it oops sticker, there's contaminants in here, and do not collect it. And maybe that'll, I don't know if it'll incentivize them to, be a little more specific on what they put in there and leaving the contaminants out. But on the other hand, I don't know if it would, promote them throwing it in their garbage if it's not picked up that week. But it's just a thought I had.
Yeah, it's a good question, and that is heavily used in other areas to varying degrees of success. So we did hear from a program in Minnesota who kind of in the more urban areas of Minnesota where they were shaming of residents has been very effective in getting them to clean up their food waste streams with some version of the scarlet letter on their bins. And depending on the neighborhood, if you're the only bin with a red sticker on it or whatever it is, then yeah, you're gonna make some change. I think it is a good idea. Hopefully our communications with haulers will keep going up and up in terms of how much we're talking with them, and we can bounce around ideas like that and figure out how we could support them to do that sort of thing. In other places where Tom Moreau and I went to programs in Toronto many years back, and they have it's all municipally driven, franchised, and they had in the region of Peel, I think it was outside of Ontario, they had a staff of, I want to say 8 or 9 people whose job it was just to go around the city and look in bins before they got picked up and check for contamination and apply those stickers and reject them before the truck got up. So it's all scale. I don't think we're gonna be hiring 8 folks anytime soon to do that here, but I think it's a great idea. In certain areas, it would be very effective.
Ken, your hand is up.
Hey, Dan. That's a great picture for your slide. It's horrible looking, but it's great. Have you had, I do imagine that people going to the drop-off centers using their green buckets being pretty good at putting the right things in, and I imagine maybe a school or a hospital being much worse at this sort of proper separation. Have you had any discussion with the haulers who service schools and hospitals, the big guys with the big trucks, about whether fines of this amount would encourage them to take action? For instance, asking their drivers to take pictures of whatever they're about to dump into their truck. I mean, I see Casella trucks coming down the road here and on Greenbush Road with mechanical arms that just tip things into bins. They're obviously not even looking at the bins. So it made me think they're the ones that are going to have to figure out who's contaminating. So have you talked to them about this?
Yeah, yes, and no. Well, a couple of important points I think are that there's a huge difference in the quality of food scraps based on the size of the hauling operation, is our experience. And even amongst the larger haulers, there's a significant amount of difference, but all the, by and large, all of the smaller haulers who are doing the smaller volume pickups have incredibly high quality food scraps and like doing a phenomenal job. And for the reasons you just mentioned, it kind of makes sense. Like when you get to scale and you're trying to do a huge route and you don't have time to maybe look at every bin, you're gonna miss a lot of stuff. And other important point to note is that the Casella pickups generally are not being composted in Chittenden County. Those are mostly go to the depackager and then to the go to anaerobic digestion. So whereas we used to get all of that food waste, I can't speak to the quality of that anymore because it's not being composted. It just goes through a machine and then hopefully most of the contaminants are removed at that point. So slightly different aside there, but so of the remaining big haulers, we have been in communication with them and I'm losing track of the initial question. Sorry. Could you?
Getting the drivers to incentivize.
Oh, yes.
them to tell the drivers.
We have, so in our discussions with them, they have mentioned like some of their drivers, it can depend a lot on who the driver is on a given day actually too, because some of them just pay more attention and care more than others. But we know that some of them are like, yeah, we know exactly which routes and which who are the problem ones, and we're hopeful, or we're welcoming this so that we can act on those individual individual generators. I think it's going to be very interesting the next couple of months once we start. The plan is to start sending out our load check reports to the haulers so that they can see on an individual load, they can see the photographs that are associated with that load and see what the monetary impact would be if they happen to reach that fine threshold. And then they can actually start passing that along to those individual generators before we actually impose the fine. So the hope is that we've got plenty of lead up time, that all of that scare that might come with being fined, they've got plenty of time to work it out and do that education. And yeah, we've had great feedback actually it's been Kim mostly, and folks from other departments have been meeting most recently with some of the bigger haulers, and they've been really good meetings, and we're actually quite hopeful, more than we were more recently. So.
And do you have other photos of contamination?
Yeah, let's look at, John, if you want to go to the next one, with the next 3 slides too, we can look at these are just kind of examples of what these different levels of contaminants are. So this might be helpful. So this is what a 5 to 10% by volume contamination load looks like. 3 different examples of it. And they're all so hard because you can't really, without being there at the time, it may be hard to tell what it is you're looking at. But the one on the right, particularly, you can see there's all those containers. Again, that's probably all from a school. We've got some milk cartons and some fruit cups. We see so many of those. And again, this is a great example of a load that is probably most like 80-95% perfect. And then they picked up 1 or 2 schools, and there were probably like 2 or 3 bags that were just completely riddled with plastic. So that would be a really great one where they could take all right, this is a contaminated load. Here's the new fine. They'll know exactly who to apply it to and who to send that to. And hopefully we can see some, actionable change. Go to the next one, John. This then is what an excessively contaminated loads might look like. And you'd be forgiven if you thought you were looking at trash with some food mixed in, because that's kind of what these look like. And the good news is that these are incredibly rare. We don't see these very often. And there's some stories behind all of these, which happen to have all come within the last year, but I would be surprised if we get 5 of these in a given year. And that's with us receiving how many in a week? Like 20 to 30 individual loads per week. So no, more than that. Anyway, so these are really rare, but what happened here, for example, the one on the right was material that we get from a local coffee producer, and somebody sent us somebody put the wrong material in that container, and it was obvious, and the hauler knew it as soon as it dumped, and so that never really happens, but it happened that time. And we haven't had a mechanism to reject them historically, so now we will. The one in the middle was from a grocery store that typically actually goes to the D-Pack. And so the fact that it has all the trash in there maybe didn't matter because it was just going to go through the machine and do that thing. But that was shut down for a few days. And so they asked if they could send all of the food waste loads to us. But I don't know. I don't think they meant to send this one to us. Anyway, so that one had a lot of trash. And then the one on the left, I can't remember the specifics, but looks like, again, like school waste primarily was the driver there. And it was probably one of the smaller school waste routes. And so it just comprised the larger percentage of the total blend. And then last one for examples, this next slide is, John, if you could advance one more. These are just examples of some of the really problematic things that regardless of how clean the rest of the load is or how big the load is, we really don't want them in there. So these are all on our list of incidental contaminants, and the bottom left might be obvious. That's why we don't want. You can probably imagine why we don't want glass in our system. Like unlike big pieces of plastic, which mostly we can screen out with our technology downstream, glass just keeps getting smaller and smaller and shinier and shinier. And anyway. We don't want that in there. So the upper left is an example of something that has been an ongoing issue where we have many tons of really high quality material that makes great compost, and then a few bags of trash thrown in. And this is one that comes multiple times a week, and almost without fail, it will be this mix. And so we've been told that once we have some financial incentive in place, that this will go away, because that's all this company needs to make the change. Anyway, so that one's hopeful. And then bathroom waste is another very common one. You can imagine that could be unfun for those folks, for Allison and Kim and the others who have sorted through these and have to discover all the surprises that come in those. And usually that's in a situation where people are trying to do the right thing, but we've determined that bathroom waste, even for folks trying to do the right thing, almost always has some undesirable additions in with it. And then lastly, the hypodermic needle, we're trying to avoid those as most folks. And so we want a way to flag, not contaminate a whole load and charge a lot of money, but just be able to raise a flag and say, hey, this load had something in it that was really problematic, so please address.
Dan, I've got a couple of questions for you.
Yes.
A quick one. I know you talked about human waste. Is pet waste an issue?
That's a good question. It depends on who you qualify as a pet. We accept small animal manures without incident typically, but we do prohibit dog waste and cat waste. So that is most pets that would be arriving.
And that would count as incidental contamination?
It would. And I don't know that we would see it necessarily. Yeah. And so I'm sure particularly if you think about how much yard waste we get, and you can imagine just the volume of mostly dog poop that comes to us in that form. So it's not and I think that was less troubling for us. We don't see it as much when we're doing our load checks. But we do occasionally see a diaper or multiple diapers, or, you know, those are the ones we are more worried about.
Next question. Do you anticipate any kind of an appeal process?
I don't know what this, again, but basing this off the MRF, I don't know if that ever rises to the level of appeal, but I think the first step would be likely then talking to Sarah and then going to the exec board. And so I would guess that that's as far as it would get, but I don't know, you know, it's the fact that we've already engaged with all the haulers and they know it's coming, and we're really wanting to not charge fines. I think they understand that. And so as long as we are, you know, they are willing to work with us, I don't think.
I mean, the appeal process comes in with the compliance process. So if it got to that point where someone is really not cooperating, Dan could decide that he needs to turn it over to compliance for compliance action.
Okay.
So there's, as we know, there's a very prescribed process, you know, for folks who are subject to compliance action.
Got it. My last question is just to get a sense of the scope. So you have an excessively contaminated load. Ultimately, that could be rejected, and you say, no, you've got to take this over, put it in the landfill. Just want to understand, there looks like $150 per ton charge. At your end, they still then have to pay all the fees associated with disposal of this material?
No, the $150 would be on top of our normal tip fee, which changes over time, but currently $70 a ton. So it's in total, they would be paying us $220 a ton, which would more than cover the cost to transport it to the transfer station and then pay their tip fee for landfilling.
I just want to get a scope of, you know, how much adds on top. Okay. Sorry, Henry, yes, you've got a question?
Yes, sir. This wouldn't do much for the haulers, but as far as the drop-off centers, I don't know if you do this, but maybe offer to go through people's recyclables to spot check them. I mean, you could also, because, you know, I've had questions and like, gee, is this recyclable? And you look and you're not sure. Okay. And just, you know, just offer, hey, if you want to, well, whatever. I think it's pretty obvious what that would do. And just put it out there and see if you have any takers.
Yeah, we have talked about doing some education at drop-off centers where particularly again, the issue there mostly is around liner bags. So I think that would be a very effective way of reaching a lot of people quickly. But the outreach department also, you know, they go out and do, and as well as Josh and Janine and now Ethan, go out and actually check on businesses and do spot checks along the path, both at the source of generation occasionally, and then also when they arrive at the facility. So there's multiple levels for interacting with folks and doing some of that education to avoid some of this for sure.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
So Dan, at the beginning, you said that you were presenting this, it's in the packet for discussion only. My strong recommendation would be, we've had a lot of information here. I think it's important for the commissioners to kind of digest this and not take action tonight on a resolution. Were we to bring this up next month, that's with your target date of July 1st, do you feel you still have enough time to implement for the education piece and the proper fair warning to
yes,
stakeholders?
I think if by late April we get to the point where we have an approved policy, then that still gives us 2 months, 2 full months to kind of practice and you know, ample time to provide our service, remind them again, not that we haven't already done it, but say, hey, now that there's fines associated, please use our services and help us help you not pay fines.
I think, again, there's been a lot of information here. I think it's important for us to just kind of take it in. Sometimes haste makes waste.
Sure. No,
let's give this due consideration. But certainly opened our eyes to the scope of the problem. And it's really nice to hear, one, that we're not in the business of assessing fines just to make money, but it's really to improve the quality of diversion. And that you're working so well with the hauling community to implement this.
Sure.
So unless there are further questions or comments, Henry, your hand is still up, but that may be just related to your previous question. Did you have one more? Nope, we're good. Then with everybody's indulgence, I think we're ready to move on to the next item on the agenda, which is actually, again, going to be other business. Is there any other business to bring before the board tonight before we enter into what will likely be a brief executive session? Tom, your hand is up.
I just wanted to know, what was the public reaction to the DOC closure last Saturday? I did hear one complaint from Jericho in writing, or did see one in writing.
We had one person comment negatively on our Facebook page, and then I received an anonymous complaint. So I don't know if it's the same person from Jericho who was not happy. So 2. But we also received on our Facebook page a couple of comments from people saying that they were glad that we closed and that they appreciated that we take our employees' safety to heart and wish that others would do so.
Okay, any other business? Seeing none, I think we will then entertain a motion to enter into executive session. Do we have language, please, to read into the record?
We do. Motion that the Board of Commissioners of the Chittenden Solid Waste District go into executive session to discuss contract negotiations with the City of Burlington regarding the Flynn Avenue property and contract negotiations with the Town of Williston regarding the host town agreement, where premature general public knowledge would clearly place the district, its member municipalities, and other public bodies or persons involved at a substantial disadvantage, and to permit authorized staff, other invited interested parties, and the Solid Waste District Attorney to be present for this session.
Before we move to a motion, can we ask the the person on the phone to identify themselves, please? There's an attendee who looks, I don't recognize the number.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
It's Kelton. I had to hop in my car.
Okay, great. Thank you. Perfect.
So we don't have anyone from the public, so we don't have to leave the meeting. We'll just stop recording.
Recording stopped.
Well, we haven't, can you turn it back on? We haven't voted on the motion to
Recording in progress.
Thanks.
I don't believe we had them. Did somebody, was it moved?
It was not moved.
I'll move it. South Burlington.
Second, Charlotte.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded that we enter into executive session. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed, say nay. Any abstentions? We will now enter into executive session by turning off recording, closing the doors, and asking any uninvited parties, of which there are probably none, to excuse themselves.
I have a quick question.
Recording stopped.
Go ahead, Lee.
I'm not